So, I've been watching a lot of videos lately of people talking about being disabled and either being infantilized or sexualized, or family members not understanding why a person with a permanent physical disability or cognitive disability would want to have a relationship and so on and so forth, or would still have those kind of urges and so on and so forth. And this is a very big topic, especially with parents who have had permanently disabled children since childhood, because they do infantilize their children, like in a very big way. And when their child opposes that, it's a very big topic that is a consistent battle, especially with controlling parents who then later want to sway the partnerships that are being formed and so on and so forth. The system does it too. And so we see these connections being made, or people trying to make connections for other people, thinking that they know what's best, but oftentimes you may not know, because essentially you're deciding for that person, not allowing that person to decide for themselves. And so we look back at, I was thinking about, and this is just in the movie, it's not completely historically accurate, but yes, during the times of the Spartans and the Greek and all of those different tribal systems, even here in the United States, but that one is a very famous one because they would say how the Spartans would get rid of any deformed babies and so on and so forth. And yes, it was more culturally acceptable to do that. In other cultures, disabled children would be sold for a lot of times for royalty, which is sad to say, but a lot of people, yeah. But, anyways, so then there's that perversion that people talk about, how disabled people are used for perversions. And there's a couple different disabled people on Instagram that do a really good job talking about their own disabilities and how in history their form of disabilities have been used in these ways, right? And so we're seeing an influx of that, where we're trying to bring accommodation to disabled communities, because we understand that the blue curb helps us all, because eventually we're all going to be disabled. And essentially having those resources as a communal resource already in play, whether it's on our streets, because we literally change the safety and security of the size of the streets, the sidewalks, so on and so forth, elevation, whatever, blah blah blah, all of those different impacts, ramps, and so on, that don't just assist wheelchair users, they assist anybody with a rolly backpack. They assist anybody carrying too many boxes and wanting to use a roller instead. It doesn't just assist disabled people, but, we use that concept. And in the last 6 years or so, I've had a lot of conversations where I stay quiet and I don't actually say my opinion about it, because sometimes when I hear some of these opinions, it's like, I had one on say how it was disgusting how a certain person was dating a much older person, and it's because she was infantilizing that disabled person. And it's like, dude, that person is almost 40. Yeah. I understand infantile, like, relationally with people who are in their late teens, early 20s, dating way older people, because I did this and a lot of it was, not okay. A lot of what I was being groomed by some of these people, and I am aware of that now, and I've learned a lot about grooming, and I've also learned a lot about how my own childhood and my own childhood trauma led to it being easier for people to do that. So essentially, education is what's going to help us the most. However, we are going to see an influx of that. How are we going to prevent it? Just like the whole overusing porn and all that stuff leads to trafficking. No, porn in itself is not what leads to trafficking. Poor regulations around sex work legalization and also unconsensual uploading of videos and stuff like that, and websites not taking them down, the dark web existing, and all that crazy shit is what makes trafficking possible. The videos themselves are not the problem. The profession is not the problem. The teenagers watching too much porn are not the problem. A lot of those teenagers are asking their parents for sexual education and not receiving it. Instead, they're being placed on medications to reduce their when they need education around because it's not like people always think, and I've talked about hypersexualization after assault because that's something I have experienced, but also neglect leads to hypersexualization. Abuse, like physical, psychological, and emotional abuse, even if it's not sexual, can lead to hypersexualization, and people getting too attached to people too soon. People used to believe that about me, and I would instantly change their status. I got really attached to one of my boyfriends, and I remember him starting shit with me like 2 months in, and from that point on, he was no longer considered someone I could fall in love with. He was now a sugar daddy. And we can change people in those categories without talking to those around us, but our behavior around that kind of stuff often confuses the people around us, because we use these things as taboo, especially when it comes to people that we believe don't have the right mentality to be dating. And so you have people trying to set you up with who they believe would be the best person for you, but they don't actually know you because you've stopped sharing parts of yourself because of people's misunderstanding. I didn't like having conversations like this with my sister because since she's bipolar, she was always comparing what I do to her bipolar disorder. And it wasn't. Because for me, my symptoms are very much PTSD and CPTSD, which make me think that, I am struggling with, and I've said it, some of the symptoms revolving around BPD, but I don't get attached to people. On the contrary, I have a huge trouble getting attached to people. Yes, I over-explain with everybody who's new because I want to clarify things. But when it's not taken in that way, then I just retract. Why? Because I have a depersonalization problem, and I struggle big time with getting close to people, especially because when I'm having my migraines, I need to be around people I trust, or I need to be by myself. I don't need people confusing me and making me think, hey, this is what I'm seeing. And I didn't realize that I was confusing other people. Because I remember in my IOP class, I met a girl who had bipolar disorder like my sister. But when she was seeing auras, for her, it was like part of her disorder. And I'm like, dude, but what if it's not? Because I have migraines and I have that. In that moment, for me, that's a little bit of magic in my life. Yes, I'm going to have a bad day, but it's not that I have magical thinking, and I can separate the two, but apparently for some disorders and dysfunctions, the issue is that they can't. And that's what I was explained to in that group. I learned a lot about my sister's condition in that group. And it's like, I get it now. I get it why you can't have these conversations with just anybody. I get why disabled children that grow into adulthood struggle having these conversations with parents. And I understand why parents of very disabled children, especially if they have intellectual disabilities, struggle big time to understand why their forms of discipline may have been abusive to their children. Yes, some of these things we can accept, but other of these things we cannot accept as a way to keep us safe or secure in any way, shape, or form. And until you learn about these conditions, you are putting people in harm's way. That's what I tried to explain multiple times to my ECM workers. Until you learn about these conditions, you're going to keep thinking just anything fits, and it does not. It does not. You're putting me in danger because you don't understand my conditions. Look, my blood pressure how it is right now because of how much my head hurts. And that's what I'm saying. Like, it comes on so quickly that you can't, and then it gets hard to articulate, and then you start losing words. And yes, I'm starting to learn that a lot of my dysautonomic effects have a lot to do with my migraine triggers, and I'm starting to learn which ones are just strictly migraine triggers and which ones are migraine and trauma triggers, which has been a whole nother mess in itself. However, I have been able to significantly reduce tension headaches by figuring out the difference between the triggers, which is what I was trying to get help with for a very long time. Thanks to my new therapist and my new advocate, I have learned to take better notes on the different sorts of triggers because it does take a different medicine to help with each. So I do invite you guys. Hypersexualization comes from neglect. However, healthy sexual practices, even within disabled communities, understanding consent, understanding the fact that they may be fetishized. I mean, even being overweight gets you fetishized. I'm telling you from experience. When I was 250 pounds, being overweight gets you fetishized, you know? Especially the way I eat. Like, even as a thinner person now, like, I eat a lot. When I can eat, oh, I love to eat. So it gets fetishized. So instead of thinking of these topics being taboo within disabled communities, disabled parenting, child relationships, and even disabled teenage social work relationships, or even adult cognitive impairment or cognitive learning disability relationship coaches and stuff like that, when they ask about sex, I understand that in those contracts, in certain cases, you're not supposed to be talking about certain things and blah, 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 blah. However, instead of tabooing that subject altogether, speaking to the parents or caregivers of the importance of them understanding so that they can protect themselves. Because unless you have those disabled people always being with someone 24 hours a day, which is not the case for those of us who have low support needs, we still have to go out into the world and defend ourselves. It's that simple. So if you kept us under a overly sheltered umbrella thinking that we weren't going to be exposed to those things, oftentimes you actually set us up for that exposure, because now you've controlled and groomed us in a controlling, overprotective environment that may have been harmful to our love map in childhood. And now all of the harm came at home. So now it's been normalized because the people that loved you did a lot of the things that now you're going to be exposed to out in the world. So there's a huge gap in sexual education when it comes to disabled communities. And I'm seeing that a lot more, that a lot of the ruptures between disabled parents and children needing that distance and independence, even though they are 100% disabled, is the fact that parents are still, to this day, infantilizing their own children. It's not necessarily that we're being infantilized by strangers out in the world. Oftentimes we're not. Oftentimes we have that perception because of how our parents have been treating us. And when we go out to the world, like I said, you still need to learn about these things so you can catch on to it. Because yes, it's why some people end up choosing to make profit from that fetishizing of those conditions. Because of the fact that it's so hard to not only get employment, but keep employment with some of these conditions. Like, this is literally as dark as I can get my car. So the light sensitivity is real. Like, but I also need a break from my sunglasses because they are starting to dig into the side of my face. And I've tried a lot of different frames so that it doesn't do that. And I'm to this point now. I'm considering going back to the special contacts I used to wear. So this is what I mean. Like, it is important that we learn about all of the conditions because, yes, they overlap, and yes, they get placed as diagnoses, like this triggered this diagnosis, but it's not necessarily. They just resemble each other. However, they're not the treatment options for those things, even though they resemble each other. The trigger and duration of those conditions matters to the treatment plan, because overprescribing medication to a person with as many sensitivities and as I leads to extreme allergic reactions. I'm having to take a break from my nausea medication right now. And it's also an allergy medicine. So it was reducing my allergic response until I had to take the migraine medication like a day or two ago. And now I'm back to this because last night it was so hot I got nauseous, but it wasn't that kind of nausea. So I have to make sure that when it's not that kind of nausea, I take the other nausea medication. Or then I get loopy, because when my gut bacteria is not doing well, I get really loopy. And then I start saying words, like the words that are in my head are not the words that are coming out of my mouth. The words that I'm writing are not the words that are in my head or the words that I'm thinking. And it's very frustrating because that gets really scary. And it's not always a brain problem. Sometimes it's a gut problem. And I've had this issue since childhood. So it makes you look really crazy. But it's why sometimes I will eat junk food and sometimes I will stay the fuck away from it for months, hoping I don't make my symptoms worse. I spent like 3 weeks in July just eating yogurt and different forms of prebiotic and probiotic food and baby food to fix my gut bacteria. And because of the medications I'm on, I've been craving pizza. So I've already, the last 2 weeks, I've given myself pizza twice. And yes, it satisfies that craving. However, it's also satisfying that bad gut bacteria. So then you have to go back, and I'm having to take my my bacteria pills. What are they called? I'm having a word problem. All right, I'm done with this conversation. Take people's fucking sexual education seriously, even if your children are disabled and permanently disabled. It is important. Every form of education matters to the fulfillment and the quality of life. Informed consent includes everything. It's not just for psychiatric disorders, it's for all forms of conditioning in life. Because otherwise, by taking that choice away from that person, they might still choose and believe what you suggested is the right suggestion. But if you don't give them the options and then the possible consequences, if they can't think of the possible consequences themselves, helping them see some of the possible consequences of their choices can often lead to better choices. I am one of those people that overthinks choices so much because I can see all of the possible consequences that then I struggle to make decisions. There's a lot of different ways that we think and move through the world. Understanding how the person that you love thinks and learns can often lead to better outcomes and success in that person being able to have a better quality of life or a more balanced quality of life. Because the social thing has always been a struggle for me, and the only time I ever socialize is with people at work. I don't have the energy for anything else. So since I haven't been working, I don't socialize, and that's not healthy for me because I don't know how to socialize. And when I do try to socialize in some of the groups that I socialize in, my very quirks that I'm trying to learn why they're a problem because they're just natural to me become the issue and the roadblock in me being able to sustain social relationships. And this has been my entire life. I've had accommodations for this my entire life. So pretending like I didn't have accommodations for work is ridiculous, because I've been very accommodated at work. So not finding jobs that can now accommodate my current circumstances is very difficult for me, because again, this is how I got socialized. It's also why I was a great caregiver, because essentially I can see all of the possible outcomes, and oftentimes I could predict my clients' behavior, and I got to socialize because with some of them I got to be a different person every day. You know, if they were having a bad day. I had one client that I had to introduce myself to every time I came on my shift. Don't anticipate the sound. Yeah. And she had a boyfriend, and she really wanted to talk about her boyfriend, and her son really struggled with that, you know. And it's like, dude, she's a full grown adult. So, you know, I got to hear some very interesting stories of what the elderly do in their free time, but we just listen. And that's what they need sometimes. Sometimes it's not really that they're having these relationships, because once they end up in a home, that's not usually the case. But she was still living on her own, and this is what I mean. Like, we as human beings need to realize that even if a person got sick and are now disabled, they are still a fucking whole human being. Your children, even though they were born disabled, you have been working so hard for them to be a whole human being and to have a full quality of life. Sometimes that means talking about those taboo subjects that you may not be ready to talk about, which includes infantilization, fetishization, actual sexual whatever, or what kind of people are the people who are going to want to date your children because of their disabilities and blah 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 blah. That's a you problem. That's a parent problem that you should be talking about in therapy, so that you can come up with a plan so that you can talk to your children without projecting that onto your children, because they don't have that issue. They are meeting people as if they were normal people, not realizing they're not normal. I didn't realize I wasn't that normal until college. When I learned about, when I really learned about autism, when I learned about how it presented itself in women versus how it presents in men, you know. And so it's we go through life thinking we're fucking normal. And we are. It's just a different variation of what normal would be. And that's why, if we are creating an accommodating society, we have to take that in consideration. Or we're going to have those misconceptions and infantilize people we love when we don't need to. Because that's one of the major reasons disabled people separate themselves from well intended caregivers, caretakers, and family. I love you and have a great day.